Learning Theory in the Real World by Cheryl Williams, Lindsay Sparkman, and Alice Horndahl. Behavioral learning theory suggests that learning occurs through consequences. It was developed by B.F. Skinner, and it was based off of Thorndike's law of effect. Behaviors increase with reinforcement and decrease with punishment. Reinforcement is a consequence that strengthens a behavior, making it more likely to occur in the future, whereas punishment is a consequence that weakens a behavior, making it less likely to occur in the future. In essence, when an action is followed by a reward, we're more likely to repeat it. When it's followed by a punishment, we tend to avoid it. How behavior modifications work. Step 1, the problem must be defined. 2, design a way to change the behavior. Identify the effective reinforcer, and then apply the reinforcer consistently to shape or change the behavior. One example I found in an article that I was researching was that a boy was out of his seat more than 10 times during independent work. The teacher identified the problem, which was him being out of his seat more than 10 times, and created a solution. The goal was to see if the student can achieve being out of his seat 8 times rather than 10. If he succeeds with that goal consistently, the teacher will then reduce the amount of times he's allowed out of his seat, going from 8 to 6 to 4 to possibly 2, until the desired behavior is met. Some examples I've listed below are things such as giving out or taking away tickets based off of if the student is exhibiting good or bad behavior, attention grabbers such as clapping in a beat, transitions such as counting down, as well as catch a bubble. Catch a bubble is specific towards Liberty Creek. This is what they use in regards to voice level within the school. When a school staff member says catch a bubble, a student will, in essence, grab a bubble with their mouth and hold it until everybody in the classroom is silent, or everybody in the school is silent. This is similar to teachers saying a number between 1 through 5, indicating the voice level they are hearing so that students are aware of how loud they are being in order to change their behavior and be quieter. Another example that I found in the article is the pre-MAC principle, which is the first blank, then blank. So one example I've seen in the classroom is first complete an assignment and then you can receive computer time. Typically with computer time, it's not something that students are allowed to go on YouTube or play fun games like coolmathgames.com. In this atmosphere, most teachers prefer and ask the students, once completing an assignment, that they can do extra activities or extra lessons through IXL or Reading Eggs. Schedules are defined and identify the amount of work required or the time that must elapse between reinforcers. Here's just a list of them that you have probably witnessed or do in your classrooms, such as praising every time a student raises their hand before speaking. Ratios are in reference to how much work is completed. So for fixed ratio, given that a student completes 5 reading logs, they can receive a homework pass. Variable ratio is giving a student a surprise reward for positive behavior and or, completing an activity or an assignment. Fixed interval or variable interval. Fixed interval is similar. An example could be a weekly behavioral check and reward if a goal is met, and then variable interval would be randomly praising students who are on task and giving points or giving tickets or fake money in reference to a token system, reward system that the teacher has implemented into their classroom in order to increase desired behavior within the classroom. Some key takeaways is that behavior is learned through consequences. Positive reinforcement is generally more effective than punishment, and then reinforcement should be consistent and meaningful.
Classmates, this is Cheryl Williams, and I will be briefly talking to you about Information Processing Theory, or IPT, understanding how children learn. Information processing theory is a cognitive framework that describes how the mind receives, organizes, stores, and ultimately retrieves information. And understanding how children learn is one of the most consequential questions an educator can ask. And information processing theory offers one of the most compelling answers that cognitive psychologists have produced. IPT offers educators a model for understanding what happens inside a learner's head during instruction, and also what can go wrong when instruction is poorly designed. So today I'll be talking to you about the architecture of memory, cognitive loads, and also provide you with a classroom example. So let's talk a little bit more about information processing theory, and specifically the architecture of memory, as proposed by the theorists Atkinson and Shiffrin in the late 1960s. They proposed a three-stage model of the memory. And so stage number one would be the sensory memory. It's the entry point of what a learner sees, hears, what they feel. Information is only held very briefly, 1 to 3 seconds. And in order for the information to pass to the second stage, you must capture the learner's attention. All other information that our students do not pay attention to will be discarded. Stage number two is what we call our short-term or our working memory. It is the active processing hub, and it also has limited capacity. It can hold potentially 4 to 7 items and only hold them for 20 to 30 seconds unless the information is rehearsed. And if your information survives your short-term working memory, it is pushed to the final destination, which is stage number 3, long-term memory. It is a permanent or virtually permanent and unlimited capacity. It is a schema-based system, so interconnected web of information where our brain actually stores our knowledge, our skills, and our experiences. And when we are presented with new information and we need to pull out something that we've already been exposed to, our brain actually goes and reactivates the schema, pulls it out of long-term memory, pushes it back to short-term working memory for active processing. So now that we talked about the memory stages, we also need to talk about the capacity or the cognitive load theory as well, which was introduced by John Sweller in the 1980s. And his work focuses on the fact that learning is limited by the capacity of our working memory. And if you remember from the previous slide, that's the last phase before information enters into long-term memory. And so he believed that for optimal memory processing, teachers must strive to eliminate unnecessary mental effort by the learners, which we call the extraneous load. So learners need to focus on processing and storing information in their long-term memory. That's the actual goal of the instruction that we give every single day. And if our learners are distracted, or we're giving them too much at the same time, or it is not clear, it's not well understood, we are impacting our students' capacity to actually pass that information all the way to their long-term memory. So the types of load that Mr. Sweller introduced was the intrinsic load, which is just the complexity of the material in and of itself. It cannot be eliminated by the teacher, only managed. So for example, complex vocabulary words, domain vocabulary, long division. Those are examples of things that we cannot change the complexity of, but we can manage how we present the information to our students through chunking, through proper sequencing, and then the middle portion of the slide, the extraneous load, which is listed there in orange, that is the mental effort that we as educators want to avoid. It serves no instructional purpose. It is wasted effort, and it will confuse and distract our learners. This can be eliminated by the teacher, as Mr. Sweller proposes. And examples are cluttered worksheets, or we give unclear directions. And so a solution for eliminating this extraneous load on the brain would be to give clear instructions and also make sure the things that we provide to our students are clear and we have focused designs on our worksheets, on our anchor charts, and in our classroom. And then the third type of load, germane load. It's just the mental effort used for the student to make sense of the content. And we do need to make more space for this germane load because it is how students are actually processing. And the more of their brain processing effort we take up with extraneous load, the less they can apply toward germane load and actually being able to enhance the retention or push that information over into long-term memory. So for example, how we can help expand the germane load is that we can ask a student to restate the concept or whatever it was that we might be teaching in their own words. And we can also provide them with practical and relevant examples that make sense to them. I will give you a brief example of information processing theory in the classroom. So a first grade teacher opens up her lesson, her science lesson, with a colorful anchor chart displaying the 5 steps of thinking like a scientist. Each step is written in a different color and illustrated with a picture cue. The teacher says that each step aloud, and then the students echo her. She asks students to point to each picture as they say each word. She then plays a 90-second video of a scientist conducting an experiment where she pauses the video briefly before each step to remind the students of what's about to happen next. So, connections to information processing theory by using this strategy, this first grade teacher, she is engaging their sensory registers through 3 different modalities: visual, auditory, and motor skills with the pointing, the visual, seeing, auditory, hearing, the echo and repeat. Also the 5-step anchor chart, chunking, which we know that as breaking it into distinct or discrete parts that our students are able to understand and can process in the moment. She's doing that with a 5-step anchor chart. And also, as I just mentioned, the echo and repeat structure prevents information from decaying in the working memory before it can actually be processed and pushed forward into long-term memory. Thank you for listening.
Happy Saturday, everybody. So today we're going to be going through the social cognitive theory. We're going to be looking at the explanation and a real-world example. So the social cognitive theory was founded by Albert Bandura, who we've been studying about. And part of what was so groundbreaking about it was that he made a break from straight up behaviorism into cognitivism. He's sort of known as the father of cognitivism. Behaviorism, which is kind of what we were looking at before with prior theorists such as B.F. Skinner, was essentially the idea that humans just react to environmental stimuli. When he started to shift to cognitivism, he added in certain variables that suggested that humans have choice and that we have a self-concept and that it's more than just our environment that affects us. It is what we believe about ourselves. It's our personality traits. It's all these different things, looking at people around us, that we have a lot more choice in our cognition, hence cognitivism, that determine our behaviors, not just indirect stimuli from the environment. So when you look at social cognitive theory, we find that there are 2 main pillars of it. There's the social pillar, having to do with others, and the cognitive pillar, having to do with what's going on in our own minds. So in the social aspect, one of the biggest things that he uncovered was that modeling played such a big part in human learning. So you'll see this typically in textbooks as observational learning, which is learning through observing others and imitating that. And there's a whole process we go through in doing that where we have to be able to retain what we're seeing happen. We have to be able to reproduce it, and our perception of what we're seeing and reproducing and how we add on different layers of it based on our personality is just kind of the whole process of how we go from observing to repeating the behavior and how it's repeated. And of course, in the schools, this is going to be a peer-based thing. Out in the world, we are watching constantly. When we are young, we are typically doing this with our parents, with our siblings, with people in our family. As we get older, we can be doing this with people in our jobs, people in relationships we have, and of course, in school, students are doing this with teachers and with peers as well. But what we find is that the peer based, where students are imitating the behavior of the peers around them, has the most influence. And another thing that folds into monitoring is modeling, is self monitoring. So being able to think about, what are they doing? What am I doing? And to be aware of what's happening in your own mind. That is the self monitoring that has to take place in order for modeling to take place. And of course, self monitoring is going to lead into our next portion of this, which is the second pillar of the cognitive side. So now looking at the cognitive side of the social cognitive theory, we have Albert Bandura's theories on self-efficacy, which is basically just the belief that you are capable, you're able to control your own outcomes, and that you can persevere through situations. And just looking at that definition, we can tell how this is incredibly important to students, particularly students making it through their academic career, going on to higher learning, and the motivations behind why they can do this. So, his theories on self efficacy kind of center around what's going on around us. So, when we encounter a situation, rather than just focusing on the behaviorism and the reinforcements that are external, Albert Bandura focused on what's going on internally. And he basically has theorized that part of our self-actualization and our self-efficacy is the degree to which we self-praise and self-punish. So on one hand, self-praise, when something happens, it's found that people who have a higher sense of self-praise, who think, okay, that's good that I did this, I'm going to reward myself with this, and have essentially positive self-talk, have better outcomes in life versus people who self-punish. This can take the form of shame, feelings of shame internal that we have, and it can lead to outcomes such as substance abuse, things that are detrimental to ourself because we are self-punishing. And a big factor in all of this as well is motivation. So self-efficacy has been proven to come through self-motivation rather than being motivated by external factors. So that is kind of what set Albert Bandura apart. So when we look at real world examples of this, I am taking examples from school because I think that's going to be the most applicable to all of us. But you can see it in the world around you as well outside of a school setting, which is really interesting. So in school, we see behavior contracts with self-monitoring. So when you have a particular behavior with a student, half the time administration will tell you, well, do you have a behavior contract? Number one, to get documentation. Number two, to help the student track this. And an important aspect of that aligns with Bandura's teachings are the self-monitoring. So not only am I giving you a score on how you did, I'm asking you to think about this, think about how you did, and give yourself a score as well. And this helps with things such as accountability and self-motivation. So creating that sense of self-efficacy. And when they see over time through this charting that they've accomplished their goal and worked their way out of this, it's going to improve their self-efficacy. I can change my behavior. I am the captain of my own ship. Things like that are going to improve their life outcomes, not only in the school building. Another example of Bandura's teachings, the social cognitive theory, in school that we see are selective groupings. So rather than ability grouping kids, putting all the high kids together, all the low kids together, and then just randomly grouping the kids in the middle, By selective grouping, for instance, integrating a group of 4 as one tier 1, 2 tier 2s, and a tier 3, this is going to be where we see that modeling in peer relationships, because the tier 1 is going to be able to model the next step up for the tier 2s and tier 3s, or for the tier 2s, and the tier 2s are going to model that next step up for the tier 3s. So when we have groupings like that, it's very important that we don't just set these groups up and let them do their thing. We have to be circulating, and we have to be making sure that these groupings are working, because peer-based is what we want, but we don't want to let it just run, because that's where you can get into instances of kids just copying what the tier 1 had, or things completely derailing and the tier 1 being off in space camp because they are disengaged at this point and frustrated. So selective groupings can be very in line with Banduras teachings, but a warning to that we need to make sure that we're circulating and keeping things productive, and carefully questioning to kind of get those students in a spot where they can work together, and all of this can start taking place. Another thing that is more teacher-led, that is going to be part of modeling, is the read aloud, think aloud strategies. And I find that this works particularly well in the lower grades. I've done it through teaching fables. So as we're reading, verbalizing those questions that can lead into answers that we're trying to get the students to mirror in their own thinking, or metacognitive strategies, thinking about our thinking. So maybe we're reading a story, and because I want them, when they read independently, to think, have I seen this pattern before? I will verbalize that. I'll say, didn't we see a character do this before? And what happened to them? And to kind of lead them into that. Not only is it helping keep their attention and pausing and taking kind of breaks for formative assessment, it's also scaffolding what they should be doing in their minds when they're reading. And they will pick up on that modeling and hopefully translate it to their independent reading, and it'll support comprehension. And I've put little stars by this one because it's something I stumbled upon recently that I have just really loved and have been leaning into, is decentering yourself as the teacher in student praise. So all that really means is, rather than focusing on what I feel about how you did, which is kind of our traditional praise, switching our language very subtly to help students monitor how they feel about how they did and how they feel about themselves. So an example of this, if a student does something that's just really awesome, we could say, "I'm so proud of you." That would be centering the way we feel about them. That is external validation. What I think would be a more line with Bandura's teaching is saying, "Awesome, are you proud of yourself?" To get them thinking about, how do I feel about this good thing that I've accomplished? That is going to be their basis for self-efficacy and for building that positive self-thought. And that is something that it was just so automatic for me as a teacher to say, "I'm so proud of you. Wow, look at what you did. I can't wait to see what you do next." To just flip my verbiage to help them. What do you think you're going to do next? Are you proud of yourself? Helping them set that up in their minds, I think, is a really powerful tool. So those are just a couple of real world examples that we see in the classroom daily that align with Bandura's teaching. That is all content wise, but I did want to pop this up on the screen because I think sometimes we hear behavior charts, behavior contracts, self-monitoring, and we need a visual sometimes, which is also in line with Bandura's teaching. So if you look on the screen here, this is kind of an example of what self-monitoring would look like for a student. So we have the student's name. This is going to be a weekly thing. You can see it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then in the rows, you have your targets. I can be in my area. I can be kind to others, follow directions, etc. And then they have a color code and they color in how they did. And ideally, you would have a copy and the student would have a copy. You make your own assessments and you reconcile at the end of the day, almost like a check-in, check-out process, just to make sure that you're in alignment, or if you're not in alignment, for that to spark a discussion and to learn more about that student and maybe their behaviors or their perception of their behaviors. That can be a teaching point too. And at the end, you'll see rewards. And ideally, these would be chosen by the student. And I think that that's important too. I think we have gotten into sometimes this illusion of choice mindset with students, and they're more complicated than that. Sometimes it is not enough, particularly with specific students, to say, all right, we're doing our work. Do you want to sit in your desk or do you want a flexible seat? A lot of kids, especially kids with ACEs, are going to see right through that, and that's not going to be enough for them. So I think empowering them with actual choice can make them feel heard, and it can put them on your team and help them understand that you are in their corner and that you're going to support them in what they actually want. You're going to listen to them. So ideally down here, these rewards would have resulted from a conversation of, what do you like? What's a reward to you? What's something that you want to do more of in class that you don't get to do a lot? What makes you feel happy when you get to do it? And then them giving you that feedback and then turning around and seeing it as part of their behavior chart, that's going to get them on your team, and it's going to make them feel like, wow, this teacher actually cares about what I like and how I can get there. So that is all. Thank you guys so much for listening. I wanted to go ahead and cite my references here. So if you want to visit any of those pages to learn more, feel free. Thank you.